Welcome to today's live stream. We're going to be doing a wolf today. And of course, as always, I have streamed the color mixing to the membership channel members prior to starting. And I'm just getting started by just getting a base coat, something neutral, kind of in between the shadows and the highlights, and this is just going to be a good starting point for me. And a lot is subject to change with this color, but it's just a good way for me whenever I'm painting a subject like this, sort of get a head start and keep myself from focusing too much on one small area. So kind of just cover the whole thing first and then get into some details. This reference that I'm using is from my own photos, a visit to the local Wolf Discovery Center, and I shared all of these reference photos with the members as well. Welcome everybody. I see some people in the comments. I'm going to be doing some Q&A a little bit later. I'm just going to get started with this process first and just kind of focus. So if you have any questions, I'll do that. I'll get to those at some point here once I get a little further with some of the detail in this wolf. So there are several other wolves in this landscape. This is oil paints, of course. This is a 30 by 40 inch canvas, and so we're pretty zoomed in here, just about 7, 8, 10 inches or so of the painting overall. And I'm using this dagger striper brush, kind of one of my favorites. And there are 3 other wolves in this painting, and I'm just going to focus on this one this morning. And the other wolves, I will have those posted to the members as well. So we're going to have a lot of reflective light in this subject, just the given landscape and its surroundings. A lot of blues and purples. So I want that to be representative on the wolf itself, but not just yet. I don't want to get ahead of myself, and so I'm kind of sticking with this neutral color. And I just want coverage. So a lot of questions that I get around adding wildlife to painting is, how do I do that? How do I transfer the drawings to my canvas? So this is something that I commonly do is I'll sketch out, in this case, my wolf on a piece of paper, and then I cut out the outline of that, and then I can use that to sort of position where I want these wolves to be before committing to their locations on the canvas. So it just helps me make up my mind without committing, and so that's what I did here. Took that outline and traced the outside of that to get what you see now. And then everything else, just kind of fill it in as I go. And the paint around this wolf is dry, and so if I do make a mistake, it's easily removed, and it shouldn't affect anything outside of the wolf itself. A little bit of something right there, get rid of that. So you notice I'm adding a little bit of this purple, violet color, just anticipating some of that reflective light that I was talking about. And when it comes to the paws, I'm not positive. I do want, so this is a snow scene, and I do want some of that to appear like it's deep snow, but I'm not sure how much of that I want, so I'm kind of leave the paws a little bit unfinished for the time being. So this first bit is fairly thin. I don't want too much, because as I start stacking paint over the top of this, it's going to have a tendency to all kind of blend together, and I don't want there to be too much existing on the canvas just yet. So I'm keeping it thin to start. What's nice about this brush is that I can really hold a lot of paint in it rather than, say, something like a liner or something smaller, a round brush. And so it lets me do get a lot of coverage, but then at the same time, if I twist it just right, I can really get some fine detail with it. A little bit left. Okay. All right, so that's a good start. So first thing that I'm going to think about is some of the shadows, some of the darker areas. Just talk about my palette. Before I kind of get into this, I've got, I had burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, titanium white, and I have phthalo blue, quinacridone magenta, and cad orange. And so they've kind of mixed some umber colors, some darker browns, and then also some darker grays. We have some burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, which is more of a black, and then some lighter blues and pinks, just thinking about that reflective light. So I'm going to start with some of these darker umber colors, just basically burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, keeping it on the burnt sienna side. And a little too brown, so I'm going to get some magenta into that, just see what happens. little more gray, a little more magenta. And so I'm grabbing a little more paint. And none of this has to be final, just kind of getting initial washes of color, splotches of color, if you will. And I can start to manipulate this and detail this out once I get a little more established onto the canvas. So I don't like to think about individual hair for just trying to get general patterns, so to speak. And just start thinking about where some of the structure is, the separation between some of these legs. And the tail. And think about the ears. So just like well, before I get to that, let's get into the legs a little bit more, get some of those legs defined. So I'm just kind of thinking about the shadows, and that's going to just start to develop the shape. And kind of use the side of this brush to sweep, and in a way it just kind of automatically creates a whole tuft of fur. And being oils, all of this can just be easily changed. And I'm really, again, just trying to think about patterns. I'm not going to get stuck on the detail. I just kind of want the patterns to be established. In fact, I think I went overboard with the leg and the tail here. So one way that I kind of fix a mistake, a good example is I want a little bit of a gap between the tail and the leg. So I'm just going to take this makeup sponge and just give it a wipe. It doesn't have to take everything off, but I'm going to end up painting some of the snow. Kind of in between the tail and the leg. I can get to that in a bit. Could give the indication of it right now, though, even. Get some of that blue and magenta. This just kind of gets me started. Alright, now in the same way, I'm going to kind of switch, kind of go to the opposite. And I'm going to think about some of the highlights. I'm going to start with this light pink. Just kind of sweep it up in the direction of the fur. And in the same way, so up above we have a pink sky, and so I'll kind of want some of those pinks to shine up top, and then we have the sunset off kind of on this side, but a lot of blues in the sky off this way, so then a little bit more of like a blue hue for the leading edge. And just kind of do a little guesswork and try to guess where that light might be hitting. Along the legs. And again, I may have just gone a little overboard with front side of this leg. I'm just going to wipe that off. My brush will wash. And then pick up some of that snow color again and just try to hide some of that leg, and that can all be adjusted later on, just to get myself a head start here. Wash my brush again. Welcome everybody in the chat. If you're just joining, I'll get into some Q&A once I get a little further. highlight. Just kind of keep going with the highlights. Gotta be kind of a meticulous part of the process right here. So this painting is all about the color. And so I really want to get that established well. And then I kind of want to connect this across to the leg. Okay, now I feel like I can start to open up a bit, start thinking about some of the direction of the hair. Some of the details. A little more highlight. Again, I kind of want the pinks on the top side, that reflective light, and then some of the more of the blues on the front side, kind of where the blue sky is. Painting with Juan, I see the super chat. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Glad to see all of you in the chat. Welcome. If you're just joining, I'll get to some Q&A in just a little bit here. Just kind of want to get a little bit further in the process. Grab some darker color. And a little darker than that. There we go. Okay, so now I'm thinking about some of the patterns within the fur. Again, I'm not really thinking individual hairs. I'm just kind of thinking, what patterns am I seeing? And then with time, as you start to build these together, all these little patterns, starts to represent what we perceive as clumps of hair and small details, and hopefully a lot of that can just start to show up automatically. Kind of pat my brush on and off, just all sorts of different ways that you can move the brush and contact it with the surface and manipulate the paint, and everything's going to produce a different result. And so just kind of switch it up as you go, and when things look right, and just kind of move on to the next part. And I always come back. All right. About the tail. A little more of that dark color. Use the back side of the brush. A little more control. Again, produces that slightly different result. You kind of just have, it's kind of a guesswork, and then when you see something that is working the way that you hope, you just kind of stick with that, continue on with it, and each part can kind of require a different approach with the brush. So I don't want to go too bright with the highlights just yet, because it's a scene at dusk, and I'd rather get to the shadows and get the shadows as dark as I can, or as dark as I think they should be, and then kind of reveal, where the highlights are, and just kind of keep the subject a little bit darker, just because of the time of day. Use the backside, the pointed edge of this, and just kind of sweep that, and look at the automatic, just kind of automatically puts those hairs in. It's a very bouncy brush, so it really kind of bounces right into the pattern of hair. Alright, so I think up by the back of the neck here, I want some brighter highlights. And with each pass, it just kind of builds the paint. It becomes more paint and more paint as I go. And can be some thick spots, when I'm all said and done. So I'm getting a little more color. So I held off of that color, and you can always add it over the top. It's hard to get rid of though, and so by kind of starting with just a neutral gray, it allows me to kind of figure out where I want to take it, and then get it right the first time. This is kind of the fun part now, because now everything's sort of established where everything should be, and I just kind of dance around with the brush and manipulate the paint, keep adding thicker paint. Kind of a back and forth process with these colors as well. And that's why I like to work with the wet on wet technique, is really allows the colors to flow into each other and makes for a nice effect. That sharp edge of the brush kind of just automatically creates these longer hairs, guard hairs. Some pinks. Again, like I said, I want those pinks to be reflecting off of the back, the top side. A lot of pink in the sky. I kind of want that shown, reflecting in the hair. So as I'm getting into this, feeling a little better about where I'm sitting, why don't we open up some questions, some Q&A. If you guys have any questions about what I'm doing, my process here, leave them in the comments, in the live chat. If you have any general questions, I've answered a lot of them in the previous live streams, as well as I have a page on my website where I have answered a lot of these questions in writing. So at this point, it's just a lot of just restructuring what I've got, just manipulating the paint and trying to just manipulate it in such a way that kind of gives me the details I'm looking for. And some of those hard edges, try to clean up. I want it all to kind of just flow into each other, and that's the process that takes some time. It's also the fun part of the process for me. And just kind of swiping the brush through what's already on there, just changing the direction of some of the hairs. The direction is probably what's most important. Not the individual details, but just sort of the direction of everything. Am I going to have the live video up on the channel? Yeah, so all the live streams get posted as a regular video once I'm done. So, yes, will be there once it's finished. And for anyone just joining, the reference photos I took myself at the local Wolf Center, which I shared all those reference photos to the members. And then I streamed the color mixing live to the members as well before every live stream. Good question, Lori. Thank you. What do I do with the leftover paint? And I'm guessing paint thinner, paper towels, use paper towels, things like that. So I try to use up the paint that I mix. And I'll use these colors to work on the other wolves. So whenever I really try to practice being conservative with how much paint I squeeze out of the tube. And I feel like I've gotten better with that over time. The used paint thinner, I've got several old jars here that from past cleaning jars that have just kind of been drying out, and most of that has evaporated and dried, and but I haven't decided what to do with that yet. It's a good question. Just kind of hold on to some of those old things. And I try to not use as... I'll use paper, or I'll use shop rags, the blue paper towels. And I try to really just wash my brush and not necessarily dry it off, but just clean it off with the thinner, and then that thinner just keeps getting mixed into the next piece of the paint that I pick up off the palette. And so a paper towel will last me quite a long time. So I don't really have much leftover paint necessarily. That's a good question. I'm not sure how to properly dispose if you've got larger quantities, things like that. Just got rejected into the art course I've been trying to get into for months, and been demotivated to make more art. Do you have any advice? So I've never really been accepted into anything when it comes to art, and I definitely know where you're coming from. I would say just really ask yourself, why do you want to create, and more so what you want to create around. It should really be something that you're passionate about, not just the art, but the subject matter. And I've always found help in that myself, is just being passionate about the subjects in which I'm painting. Obviously wildlife and landscapes, that really motivates me, because I like to be out in the outdoors enjoying wildlife, and so when I'm not, it's fun for me to kind of keep that around and paint around those subjects. And I think just finding a love for your subject matter, and making sure that whatever your subject matter is something you're really passionate about, and that's where I find motivation. Is the audio a bit low? I could turn that up a little bit. Maybe that'll help out. And hopefully improve these live streams moving forward. On average, how long does it take to complete a painting? Yeah, it's a question I get a lot. I don't know about an average. It's hard to put an average to it. But 30 by 40, it take me several weeks, and that's if I'm working on it, kind of nonstop. So I feel like at this point, a lot of it is about kind of smoothing out some things. Some of it still looks a little blocky. Some of the edges kind of a little bit too rough, too hard of edges in some places. And so I spend a lot of time, and I think it was shown in when I did the grizzly bear live stream. When I left it, it was pretty blocky, but after I work it for a long period of time, a lot of that starts to smooth out. And so that's kind of what I focus on at this stage, is just trying to get everything a nice soft feel. It can take a while, a lot of back and forth. Thank you for the membership option. What you provide is phenomenal and such an incredibly reasonable cost. Thank you. That's my goal, and really appreciate knowing that. I appreciate the feedback, and I'm happy that so many of you can find it helpful. I know reference photos are hard to get, so I really try to share as many of those as I can. Some more beautiful landscapes from the winter in Yellowstone. I'm going to post here today or tomorrow, I believe. How old when I got into painting? That's another common question I get a lot. Been drawing my whole life, but I think I got into painting around when I was 18. When I really seriously had it kind of take over my process. So really start to criticize my work here now with the tip of the brush. Little nose up here. Give it a good wash. Okay. I just kind of stand back and think about what I have here. And probably just start to get, I think, some darker colors. It's looking good, but I think that I went a little light on some of the shadows, and I could probably start adding more contrast to some of this hair. really like the live stream. Do I varnish afterwards? Yeah, I do. I use a Gamvar varnish, which I just did a short video. So I like Gamvar. And I do that. Just anybody wondering, that's, what's recommended is when the thickest part has hardened, you kind of do the fingernail test and poke into it, and as long as it's nice and firm, you can apply those breathable, removable varnishes. When people think about waiting 6 months to a year to varnish a painting, that would be more for a traditional varnish, permanent varnish, which is non-breathable, and so it does not let your painting continue to cure underneath, and so that's when you want to make sure it's dry for a permanent varnish. And the Gamvar is a good temporary option, and then that could be removed down the road, maybe 10-15 years down the road, and then who's ever restoring the painting could then put on a permanent varnish after that. The dimensions of the wolf, that's a good question. Probably about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 inches across this way, 3-4 inches this way. So that's just a size comparison to the brush for you. Putting together a photo order, that's awesome. Yeah, the photos are for you to enjoy however you wish to enjoy them. I'm just a guy with a camera, and I'm happy to share those, and happy to see so many people are enjoying the reference photos. I think we've got, I want to say we got to be getting close to 750 or so. Yeah, Donna, the varnish I recommend is the Gamvar, and that can work for both acrylics or oils. By Gamblin. Okay, just get some of these darker colors yet. Still feel like I need to bring those down. And as you start to build up some thicker paint, then when you start to swipe the brush across, that as that thicker paint builds, it starts to mix in a more pleasing manner. And so keeping your paint thin can kind of work against you, I think I've found for myself anyways. And as you keep working it and keep adding more paint to it, then really get some nice expressive textures, and it really flows into it. Each color flows into the next really well. And do I plan on putting oil glazes? This is oil, so this is all oil. I'm no longer working with acrylics for right now. I'm really enjoying the oil process, so this is all oil. And I may do a little glazing. It all kind of depends, and that I'll get into once I kind of feel like the whole painting is finished, so to speak. Big Creek, Little Farm. I'm glad you stumbled across. Welcome. Did I use a flow medium when I did use acrylics? No, that's a good question. I would use just, I think it was Liquitex glazing medium, and then a little bit of water. You got to be careful adding too much water to the acrylics. You don't want to break down the binding properties of the paints. But things, so it's good to use a medium if you kind of want to thin it down. But I would often use the soft body acrylics just because they were already softened up and they had a lot more of a flow. The Art Sherpa, I haven't heard that name in a long time. I don't peruse YouTube very often, to be honest. But I remember her channel from a long time ago. That's awesome. Appreciate that, Art Sherpa. So many awesome artists that just so willing to share these days, and it just was not that way even 10 years ago. It's just so cool to see so many people willing to share. I think it's really blossoming kind of a new era of artists that, think differently. When people share information, it really leads to innovation, I think. And so just going back, just thinking back to the question about what do I do with used paper towels, and again, I do have one, and I use it for probably many days before it's actually spent. Um, but just for an example, I have not washed this brush or dried it off yet in this process here. Just kind of a lot of times just kind of wipe it off, and then I just get into the next color. And then I'll wash it and just kind of dab it off, and then that paint thinner on the brush is useful, keeps everything flowing nice. Do I use chemicals to speed the drying time? So I'm using liquid impasto. And that's something that I've really grown to love. I like the liquid impasto, or just any medium that has more body to it. Just it keeps the paints a little more opaque. And I like having the physical texture, and then I do thin that down with the paint thinner as well. But that's can speed it up quite a bit. So now just thinking about some highlights. It's just an ongoing process. It's just going to slowly build over time. It takes a long time. Okay, just wipe that off a little bit. Yeah, no pre-recording. I really want to get back to just being in front of the easel more, and the live streams just make it really easy for me to focus on my art and focus less on the video process, and seems to be working out good so far. Had a few hiccups with the lives, but I think starting to get the kinks worked out. Yeah, I appreciate you being here, Donna. Thank you. Appreciate everybody. How do you tackle such a small eye and nose? Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm into right now. I really just think about the impression of them, and I try not to get into the specifics. And so when I'm finished, I kind of think that everything's going to be... and I think if you look at the recent painting I posted with the grizzly, I think that's a good example, kind of what I'm referring to, where if you zoom in, it's the eye is really not there, and there's a few details, but I just don't get stuck on them. And so a lot of times in something like this, I just want the impression of this stuff to exist. When you look at it up close, it kind of just becomes nothing, but zoomed out, looked at as a whole, is when you really start to see or envision everything kind of, coming together. Looking good. I think I want so I'd kind of mix this amber color, orange, burnt sienna, and I want a little bit of that around the ears. Yeah, so especially with this painting, these wolves are actually, quite small to the scene overall. So I don't want to get stuck on any details. I don't want my viewer to be stuck on any of the details. I just kind of want everything to be present and to be appreciated, but not focused on. Yeah, great way to have a more personal feel. I agree. It's really fun to... I feel like it builds more of a community. It's kind of fun to get everybody in the live chat and alright, I think I need to try and get some more dark spot right where the ear should be. This work, it can be a little difficult to layer some of the wet paint onto itself, so I just kind of go thicker. Yeah, with using oils, just having an open window next to the easel. I think airflow is good. I know some of the chemicals can be a little harsh. Yeah, I think that can be enough. If you have a little bit of flow to it. I like to use I have a air purifier in the room with a chemical graded filter. It's a HEPA filter. But I think if you have like a nice flow of air of any kind, that can really be enough, I think. Kind of go in reverse now, getting some of the longer hairs. So this is when the paint is stacking up more and more now. It's really becoming thick. Just really light and just trying to bounce the brush, and as I swipe away, kind of just leaves those nice sharp hairs. Okay. Grab some of this brighter pink. Yeah, David, am I using any reference photos? I am. I share all the reference photos to my channel members, but I am using reference photos. These are photos from a trip the other week to the local wolf discovery center that we have here. So I got a whole bunch of photos. And that gets me in the right direction. But, you know, the photos were kind of taken midday, so a lot of the colors really just don't exist. And so I'm kind of just using the colors of the landscape to try and get some of these pinks and blues, and I kind of want them to show and to appear as maybe reflective light. So there is some guesswork, but it's helpful to have reference photos to kind of get you started. Just a few longer hairs in the back, kind of using just really carefully trying to get just a little bit of contact with the brush and pull away and lift off and get some of these hairs to appear. And even so, I've got a good roll of paint, and even just pushing and lifting off can leave a good chunk of paint that can give you a nice bright highlight. I can always kind of add a little more color if I need to at a later time, so I'm trying not to add too much to begin with, just because I am trying to guess some of these colors, blues and pinks. And paint and fur, something like this, it just, and then being so small, it can take a long time. It really can. So try not to rush it, and just with every pass with the brush, just kind of re-ask myself, you know, what could I do different to, or how could I manipulate the paint to make an improvement of some kind? Just get me in the direction of feeling like I'm finished with it. And I think the more that you work on something like this, lots of small fur detail, the better it can become, as long as you're keeping it controlled and maintaining consistency. You almost have to just get more and more patient as you keep going with this process, because it can be rushed in the beginning, get coverage, but then you just kind of have to progressively get slower and slower to, as you get closer to the finish line. Would love to see a live painting a horse. Yeah, I'm sure I'll do that at some point in the future. The recent painting I did was kind of before I got set up for live, but I'm sure at some point I'll get into another one. So I think a lot of this at this stage is really focusing on the direction of all these hairs, and just trying to clean up any small imperfections, because those imperfections really add up to take away from the subject overall, I think. And so I'm just trying to criticize what I've done already on there, what I have already on here, and just slowly start to make small improvements. The name of the brush, it's a good question. It's a Dagger Striper brush by Princeton. I have it linked most of the time below the videos. I think it's probably my favorite brush, well, for a lot of things, but especially fur. Am I going to do a salmon? I really want to get into. I've got some ideas for fish paintings. But I'm just not there yet with the idea and the material. And actually, the spring, summer, I'd like to get out into some of the rivers around here and take the GoPro in the water and try to bring the idea into life a little more. But I do have some ideas for some paintings with fish. I like to tell stories with my art, and developing those stories is probably the hardest process. And painting almost seems like the end of the process. But a lot of the times, the paintings just take years to kind of This painting, for example, I've had this idea for something like this for so long. I just haven't put the pieces together. Then when I was out and had kind of experienced the evening in the same way, I was at a spot, looks just like this. The colors were just such a way, middle of the winter, that I just knew that was it. That was kind of the scene or the inspiration that I was looking for. And then actually getting the photos of the wolves and putting the pieces together near the end, that was, almost the easy part. The hard part is just bringing that idea, to life, and whether in your mind or on paper. That's kind of the challenge, but do have some ideas for fish. And yeah, I definitely do more videos and share that as well. So I've just been kind of using the shape of this brush to my advantage, and just speckling on the indication of hair, and as all this paint is fairly thick and wet, just sometimes you don't even need extra paint on the brush. Just by contacting it in a certain way, you change the color, change the structure, just with the paint that's already on the canvas. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now. Like I said, it gets slower and slower the closer that I feel like I get to the finish line. Yeah, the snow in the painting, I did that. That was a really hard part of the process for me to figure out. And I couldn't get the camera in such a way that was really conducive for live streaming. I kind of had to have the camera off to the side, and I really had to stand in front of the painting, and just the way that I was working was hard to film it. I did film it in small segments and kind of moved the camera as best I could. I have the footage of that, but I'll probably share it, the longer version, with the members, and I will have that as part of the time lapse when I post that. But some parts are really difficult for me to get the camera in a position where I can continue to work the way I want to work, and also film it in a proper manner. And I'll do my best to keep sharing things like this. Some parts are just hard for me. But the snow was painted in pretty much the exact precise way that I painted the sky. So I like how a lot of this is looking, but some of these I don't like the fact that some of the hairs are maybe too well defined, and so I kind of want some more softness, and that's what I'm going to work on. So I kind of got the direction of the hair, but now, some of it is a little bit too deliberate, and I kind of want to soften up some of these details. And sometimes there is such thing as too much detail, and I definitely think there's parts of this that I've got too much fur detail, and so using the back side of the brush and just kind of continuing to work it in the same direction, I can start to just blend those details out. And so it's just this, again, a good example of the back and forth process that I go through all the time. Is that Egyptian violet in the snow? The violet is quinacridone magenta combined with phthalo blue green shade, and then you add some white. It can really give that a nice violet color, and it's the same kind of color that you see up in this pile of paint. So I think it's mostly there. I just, again, I want to soften up. This is where I was referring to things getting slower as I get closer. There's just a lot of things that I just want to fine tune and clean up. And sometimes you don't need all that detail, and but it's helpful to, and it's another good reason why I like working wet into wet. Just allows me to work in that back and forth type of manner and get the details on there, and then pull it back the other direction. And then if I feel like it needs a little more, put it back and pull it back in the other direction, add a little more detail, and just that back and forth process just kind of just helps me work it until I feel like I'm happy with it. And then, sometimes a lot of those small details, a few get left behind, and then I think that's where you can find the sweet spot. And so just like building up the shadows and the highlights, a lot of times I go back and forth and add the shadows, add the highlights, and get rid of some of the shallow shadows and fine tune it. And the same kind of method is applied with the details. Add some detail, take some away, add some back in, maybe a different tone or type of detail, and that back and forth process just kind of, I feel like, helps me get there. Definitely starting to get there with some of this. Again, I'm just focused on the feel of the fur. I want it to feel detailed, but I don't want that detail to really be there. And a lot of the stuff I did prior, a lot of it is precise detail, but then just having that wet paint, being able to continue to work it, you just start to just fine tune, soften, get rid of some of the hard edges. And I'll probably poke at this for quite a while after the stream. And there becomes sort of a sweet spot with the blending. And this was the same case with the sky. And there's always a time when the paint gets tacky to a point where it's definitely not the same as when you apply it, and it starts to firm up a little bit, but then it provides a different feel, a different, just kind of a different way that the paint blends out, and the way a different feel in the way that you manipulate it, and it kind of turns into a sweet spot where it really responds well to the things that you're trying to do to it. And that's when a lot of the fine tuning, a lot of times that's when I find I can really nail it down. I think the grizzly bear was a good example. I think the sky is a good example. When I first kind of initially go through this and get the subject established, it can feel like it's there, but maybe not quite the quality you're hoping for or you were expecting. And then a lot of times you just kind of go back into it, maybe after a good break, and that paint stays wet. It starts to firm up a bit, and then it just really starts to respond well at a certain point. And so there's kind of a sweet spot, just a small window before it dries, where I feel like I can get a lot of the work I want to accomplished. And sometimes it's hard to do, initially in a stage like this right now. And so I try to keep that in mind as well, and I'll definitely come back to it and poke at it a little bit. It helps to just walk away from it, get a different perspective. And the feet, like I said earlier in the stream, that's just something I haven't made up my mind quite yet on the feet. Get a little more, there's a spot right here where I tried to adjust. I just don't know what I want to do with the feet, and I'm going to add footprints in the snow. I want it to perhaps be walking on the snow, maybe half on top, maybe a couple feet sinking in. But I'm not, I'd like to do that all at one time, tying the feet into the snow as well as adding some of the prints kind of behind the wolf itself. And so I'm going to just leave the feet where they're at, and then I'll get into that at a later time in the process when I feel like I have my mind made up more so on that. Let's see, blue. Do I answer the chat messages? Yes, I do. Done a fair amount of Q&A in this stream. If I missed your question or comment, I apologize. Try to keep my eye on the chat. Again, I'm just trying to, instead of having a sharp contact with the brush, I'm trying to lean that brush more on the side and just make some softer strokes. And you can just kind of see that with every little effort, things hopefully they just slowly improve. So many ways to approach wildlife. It's a difficult subject. To get it to feel natural is what I think can be so difficult, especially when you're working small. But just not giving up, patience, just embracing some of the textures and patterns that the brush gives you. It can just go a long ways, and just not overthinking it. Pesky ear and the snout. It's a difficult area, like we were talking about before. It's probably have to come back to some of that. But just leaning back and looking at it as a whole. It's getting closer. Again, I want some of that reflective light thinking about the pinks. A little more pink, and I'll kind of use that right along some of the back edges of the legs. And some of the leading edges. More blues from the sky. Now, a lot of times you don't need to brighten the color of the highlights. You just need to make the highlights thicker. Just to add some thicker paint, and sometimes just the thickness of the paint can make it appear brighter the thicker that it gets. You're seeing more of that color of the paint reflect back at you rather than what's underneath. Yeah, I think with acrylics and wildlife, you can sure do a lot. If you ever want to look for good examples of an artist that uses acrylics and does just outstanding wildlife, look up the Houtman brothers. Just phenomenal what they do with acrylics, and it's always baffled me. But if you're ever questioning the capabilities of acrylics, just check out their work, and I think that's all the answer that you'll need to have for that. It's just outstanding work. So I definitely feel like I'm getting closer now. I think at this point it's just gonna take some extra effort, just after I stand back and step away from it. It's just so difficult to see things for what they are sometimes when you're in the moment. I just try to get it as good as I can, and then eventually just kind of take a break. And some of there's some hard edges just in places, and I think just carefully softening up some of those edges can go a long ways. But I'm going to have some. I'm not positive on the color, more so the value of this wolf. Some of the darks and lights. And I feel like I'll have a better idea when I get to some of the other wolves that I'm going to be painting in this landscape. And I want there to be some variety in the colors of each one of these wolves. I'm going to have a black one. This one is a pretty light colored coat. I kind of want to get to the other ones before I go too far with this one. So I think I'm about there. Maybe a little definition right up under the chin. Not bad. Okay. So it's pretty good. A lot of times, some of the specifics of this, and there's a few imperfections kind of around the edges. That I'll just kind of have to get the camera out of here and really focus in on just cleaning up some of the edges, fine-tuning a few things. And I think once I get to some of the other parts, the other wolves in the painting, and start to add some of the other details like the trees, I'm going to add some trees here. Just have a better feel of where I'm at. And so I think right now it's kind of the goal has been met. Really get this established and get a good feel of the color and the contrast and what they're going to be and what they're going to look like, and then just kind of take it from here and use what I learned with this one, apply it to the next animals in this painting, and then just kind of take it from there. So hope you guys enjoyed this little bit of a demonstration here. Again, just kind of leaving the feet for now. Figure that out later. But I think that's just about it. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for your questions. If you have any more at any time, leave them in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Happy painting and have a great day. Thanks, guys.